Hello and welcome. This is Mouse Gunner, and we're back with some more Automation, the Car Company Tycoon game, continuing on with the campaign roleplay of the Edison Car Company in 1996. Now, in the previous videos, I went through all of the engine builds for the car models we'll be building, and now that those are complete, it's time to jump into the actual building of the models themselves. And this is coming right after a major update, at least for the open beta version of the game, which adds quite a bit of complexity to the building of a model. As you can see, there's all these tabs down here, and it's been quite a while since I've played the game, and I have played around with this a little bit, but there's a lot of these new features that I really don't have that complete of an understanding. And because there's a lot of extra complexity, there's also going to be a lot of tweaking that I'm probably going to end up doing off camera. So I'm going to show you the basic setup of how I'm going to do things, and there's probably going to be a lot of me setting things up ahead of time and then showing you the results afterwards. So let's first start with the Luna, which is going to be the first car model we're going to work on for 1996. Now selected the correct year. And let's pick out a car model. Well, I want this to be a front engine car, so let's go ahead and select that. And I want this to be a smaller car, as that is going to be the type of car we're looking for. So I also want it to be a four-door sedan. Looks like I have that option here. I think by selecting this, though, I kind of taken things a little bit out of order, but it looked like this car body right here for 1996 has four-door option, which looks exactly what we're looking for. Matter of fact, did it hot me down a little bit? Yeah, it did. Let's see if there's any other four-door. So we're looking at about, here's the one I selected, this one, 93.7-inch wheelbase. So we want about that. So this is pretty close, but it only has a five-door option. What about this one? All right, so it looks like this would probably be a good candidate for the Star. And this would be a good candidate for the Constellation. So I think this model that we initially selected, I think is going to be what we choose. I like the size of it. So we're going to do the four-door option here. For the chassis, we're going to go with monocoque. Now, one of the additions is the space frame chassis, which is a nice addition, but it's not going to be appropriate for this car build. I'm going to make that out of corrosion-resistant steel. This is going to be a front transverse mount. And we're going to go with McPherson strut in the front and torsion beam in the rear. And I'm noticing this is a little bit different. I believe there used to be a plastic panel material choice, and we don't have that choice anymore. What would be the next best choice if we didn't choose that? Well, I don't think we're going to do aluminum. Carbon fiber is right out. Fiberglass doesn't sound appropriate, so I think maybe either steel or corrosion-resistant steel. Let's see the big difference. So I'm going to select steel, and let's get a direct comparison here. So production units is the same, weight is the same, material cost is lower with steel, tooling cost is the same, engineering time is the same, safety is the same. The only real difference I see is just corrosion. And then I'm going to assume that there's probably additional costs that we're not really being given here. So I'm going to go with corrosion-resistant steel. We don't want our cars rusting apart, but to keep costs low, we might have wanted to choose steel. You know, it's one of those things that you can choose. I'm more than likely going to do the styling off camera here, so I'm going to take a cut here. All right, I'm back with the styling completed. And as I've done in the past, I like to keep the styling pretty simple. With the basic nature of the current fixtures in the game, I don't really put too much emphasis on the styling at the moment. I know there's a lot of mods out there that give more styling features added into the game, but I don't want to depend upon mods too much while the game is still in early access. In any case, I have the drive type set up to transverse front-wheel drive. And we're going to go ahead and enter the engine we want to use, and hoping that it fits. It should fit. All right, so and the naturally aspirated version of that. Possibly we'd also like to fit in the 2-liter engine that is in the Star, if we can find it. There we go. Let's just see if it fits. Okay, it is not able to fit, and this is long been a problem with the game. I don't even know if it will show it. Yeah, it's not even showing it. But we'll go ahead and get that 1.6 liter engine in there, which is why I built a 1.6 liter engine. They are still modeling in the gearbox of a transverse engine, honestly, incorrectly, and as a result, that shifts the engine pretty far over to the left here and makes it pretty hard to fit engines in. I mean, we have all this space over here that we are not able to utilize because of the way they model in the gearbox. Any case, let's go ahead and just remind ourselves the performance that this engine gives. So 92.7 horsepower and 90.9 foot-pounds of torque. Honestly, a little bit on the pokey side, and this car might not have that great of acceleration as a result. We'll have to see. But let's now jump into the actual setup of the model. So I'm going to start off with a base trim with a manual transmission, single clutch, 5-speed gearbox with an open diff. The initial tires, I think I'm going to go with medium compound just to get an idea of what we're going to have. Go with steel rims. As I said earlier, I'm not going to really focus on fine-tuning any of the setup at this point. I'll probably do most of that off camera. In case, we're going to go with a solid disc single piston up front. Just make that maximum size. And drums in the rear. Make that maximum size. Then move on to the aerodynamics. We're going to go with fully clad. And cooling airflow, I always like to put it about 10 above the required cooling. Of course, we can always tweak that later if we want. All right, that looks like about right. Get rid of the wing angle. And move on to the interior. We want 5 seats. Standard interior. Maybe basic cassette. I'll think about that later. Power steering is standard and standard safety. For the initial suspension setup, I'm going to go with standard springs, twin tube, passive, and just give it a normal preset. And these are our initial stats. Well, I'm going to have to do a lot of fine-tuning off camera, and we'll be back with that. All right, I have things set up more or less where I'd like them. I ended up with 2 different trims, an automatic version and a manual transmission version. And in the future with other models, I'm going to have more variations than that, but I like to keep things simple with the Luna, so we're only going to have just these 2. Now, as far as the gearbox setup goes, I have the 5th gear as an economy gear going beyond the estimated top speed to give us a nice cruising gear to maximize fuel efficiency. And the end result of my setup is I have a 0 to 62 time of 12.9 seconds. I don't have any wheel spin. And the fuel efficiency is at 28.6 miles per gallon, which is not much different than what I have been seeing in the past in my previous experience with the game. I had a question that was raised why I was setting the fuel richness of my engine so low. And there was for 2 reasons. The first reason to limit the engines because it's pretty easy to get engines that perform a lot better than would be the norm. Now, and this engine isn't that great of a performer as far as horsepower and torque numbers, but even with that extreme of low, pretty lean fuel mixture, I'm still not getting that great of fuel efficiency numbers. Now, whether or not this number is a combined number, which means both city and highway fuel economy, I'm not really sure. Typically, the numbers we're used to seeing in the U.S. is you give the highest result, which is your highway economy, and that's usually what we refer to. So I don't know if this is combined fuel efficiency or not, but I would expect better out of a small, light car that we've set up for that extreme of fuel efficiency. But in any case, that's just my thoughts on things. Moving along, I didn't really change much with the tire setup. I felt like this was a pretty decent setup for this type of car in this time period. Now for the brakes, again, not a whole lot changed here. I had a little bit of a fluke for a second there where for some reason smaller brakes in the rear were giving me better results in drivability and sportiness, but apparently by changing some other things around, that went away. I'm not really sure what caused that because you would think worse brake fade, more brake fade would give you worse results. But as I said, it was just weird apparition that happened. And this is the open beta version. Maybe there's a little bit of bugs coming into the game from that. I'm not really sure, but it cleared itself up. In any case, cooling airflow, nothing much changed here. I did make one addition with this setup. I did add ABS, and that might have been the thing that fixed that weird apparition that I was noticing. I might be actually able to duplicate it here. Let's go with getting rid of the ABS and go back to the brakes. And let's see if we get a bonus. Yeah, okay, so this is exactly the weird thing that I was noticing. So for some reason, without ABS, if you reduce the size of the brakes, giving yourself more brake fade, making your distance to stop worse, for some reason it actually makes all of your other stats benefit from that. Now, it could be the difference in weight, but it's not that big of a difference in weight to be that significant of an increase for everything else. So that's just a weird thing that I noticed. But we're going to go ahead and set things back up the way they were with the ABS system to normalize things. In any case, moving along with my suspension setup. Now, as you saw, I did set it with the normal preset, which I always tend to like to do. But I did tweak things quite a bit, mostly stiffening the suspension in certain areas. So stiffening the suspension in the rear here with the spring stiffness, stiffening the damper stiffness overall, although giving more of an emphasis to the front. And I think I stiffened the sway bar a little bit as well as adjusting the ride height, I think. I moved this both up and down, so I'm not sure how much different it is from the initial default. But that's more or less some of the changes that I made. And the end results we get is a drivability of 42.1. Sportiness of 16.9, comfort of 22.6, prestige of 13.5, and safety of 39.4. Now, in the past, I would go over the detailed stats. I think I'll do that for this video. I'm not so sure how much I'm going to do that in the future, but for any case, I'm going to go ahead and breeze through this, give you a few seconds so that you could pause the video if you want to look at any of these in detail. So we already have been looking at the drivability tab for a while, so let's move on to the sportiness tab. The comfort tab, prestige, and finally safety. I'm not going to do any of the other tabs just for brevity's sake, and I'm not sure if I'm going to do this in the future also for brevity's sake. But let's look at our test track. So top speed comes in at 117 miles an hour, and we already talked about the 0 to 62. And we can see the weight distribution is not too bad for a front-engine, front-wheel drive car, 53.4% front bias. Let's go ahead and take a look at the track time here. I also noticed this has been taking a while to load up. In case, let's go ahead and stop that so we can get an idea of the time. So it came in with 1 minute, 45 seconds, 0.82, which is, I think, respectable for the type of car. So let's go ahead and jump into the automatic transmission version and take a look at some of the changes there. So the automatic transmission is the biggest change here. And it's a 4-speed automatic, which I think is more typical for the time, rather than a 5-speed automatic, which would be equaling things as far as the number of gears. And a big drop-off that we'll see, as well as the fuel economy, is also the 0 to 62 time. So what I ended up doing is I got rid of that final gear being an economy gear, going beyond the estimated top speed, and made it much more of an aggressive gearbox setup. As a matter of fact, we do have a little bit of wheel spin here, which we didn't have with the manual transmission. But even still, with that much more aggressive setup, I'm still getting a much slower 0 to 62 time. Now, if I had kept things the same, it would be even slower than what we have here, obviously. So that's a little bit of a problem. And this is honestly something that I'd like to see maybe change in the future. To have that big drop-off from change from an automatic transmission to a manual transmission, I don't know how justified that is. In reality, you usually would expect better performance out of a manual transmission, but I don't know if it would be that big of a difference, honestly, especially considering how I tried to make this gearbox a more aggressive setup even after that change. In any case, not much else has changed, really. But I'll go ahead and quickly go through things so you can see the different graphs and get a comparison. Now, I am going to have to change the brake size here because I think I forgot to do that when I made the clone here. So there's going to be a little bit of a bonus performance here. that we will see. And I'll just go quickly back here to see if there's any real changes outside of that. It looks like we reduced our wheel spin a little bit because we have a little bit more weight on the wheels by increasing that brake size. But otherwise, I'm not really noticing much of a big change other than in the actual stats over here. So let's go back to the brakes. Get an idea there. Aerodynamics. This also has the ABS system. And the suspension setup is the same. And let's go into the test track. So, well, actually detailed stats first. So we have drivability, sportiness, comfort, prestige, and then finally safety. All right, let's look at that test track. So the top speed has dropped down a bit to 115.6 miles an hour. And the 0 to 62 time we already talked about. The weight bias hasn't much changed, although the weight might have. Go ahead and get our track time. We can assume that this is going to be slower. And we see that. Pretty significant drop off here of close to 3 seconds. And then a lot of that is just the difference in the pretty large difference in the 0 to 62 time acceleration time difference. All right, with all that being said, it's time to progress on to the next tab, which is the setup of the actual engineering and factory setup and all that stuff that's more or less new to me. And I'm going to do a lot of that off camera, and then I'm going to come back and show you a lot of what I've done. All right, starting off with this first tab, we are setting up our project team, where I more or less just went really simply with this. I selected the 2 highest level people to be the team lead. And for the engineering team, I just selected people that were the best in a particular field. So if we just click on a new person, I started off with this field, just selected the one that was the best. Then I went to the tire-y looking one, and then the brakes, and so on. And that's more or less all I did for the team. And I did that for all the categories. And that more or less is our team. Now, I'm not exactly sure how this affects the overall project because I wasn't really noticing a difference in any of these numbers, at least from what I saw. As a matter of fact, we can try that out. If I get rid of one of the project leaders, let's just take a look at the numbers. All right, so I noticed something over here changed. And it looked like it was just mostly experience was the thing that changed. I'm not sure if this has any real effect on the cost or the engineering time of the project. In any case, we'll just go ahead and select him again. And again, I'm not really sure exactly how this team setup affects things. There's a lot of this element of things I really am kind of guessing at. Now, funding, I kind of get. More or less what you're doing is you're pumping money into the development time. So right now, the total engineering time of our car model would be 2 years, 5 months. If I were to pump more money into it, the total engineering cost goes up, but the time goes down. So if we wanted this project to complete as quickly as possible, we'd pump a bunch of money into it, and we'd shave off a few months. We're not going to do that. We're just going to keep it at 50. Now, as far as the focus, I'm assuming this has to do with the way that your engineering team is approaching this project. You're either learning from it and gaining experience, or you're trying to do the project as quickly as you can. So more of an efficient focus. And I went more efficient because as far as the Luna is concerned, I don't think we're going to put that much of an emphasis on the advancing tech and everything with this project. So that is what we've done. And as a result, we've shaved off time and money, as you can see here. But the downside is our team's gaining less experience. So that doesn't help us for the future. Now, as far as reliability, we can select a particular trim, and we can either boost or undermine the reliability. If we are to boost it, it increases the engineering time and the cost. If we bring it down, the reverse is true. And it will also affect the overall reliability of that model. So we can see this is the overall reliability of the 1.6A, which is the automatic transmission, and this is the manual transmission. If we were to bring down the reliability, we can see that directly affecting the stats of that trim. I'm going to keep everything at 50, and I probably do that for all of the models going on from here, just so that we have a base point and we know what we're doing here. All right, as far as the production type, we're going to go with full. This isn't a concept car, and this isn't limited production. We're going to try and produce as many as we possibly can. So now let's move on to the engine, and the same process of selecting the team was done here, and the same focus was set up. And just as we could with the carb trims, we can do the same with the engines. We're only using the NA variant of this engine, so we only have that one engine to select. And we can tweak the reliability of that if we chose as well. And we have a separate engineering time as well as engineering cost. Moving on to the factory setup, I'm going to use large factories for both the cars and the engines, and I'm going to try to do that with every model going on forward. So we'll just assume we have a large factory. Now, I'm not sure if the way that the campaign would work is if you could just use this one factory for everything. So for instance, I have factory slots, and currently I'm taking up 2 of the slots in that factory because I have 2 trims. I would assume that that means that this one factory could support 3 more slots. At least that's my assumption. Not exactly 100% on any of this, but with the large factory and a lot of the other settings that I've chose, the tooling cost is going to be $2.64 billion. Automation, I'm not exactly sure what this number means, but we also get cars made per day. And this we can easily tell. This is how many cars we're going to make a day. So we're making about 1,000 a day for a total production of about 365,000, a little bit more than that, a year. So that's not too bad production-wise. That's pretty good. And I think that would be an okay production number for this type of car. I mean, this is a lower cost, higher volume production kind of car. At least that's the idea. And then we have the average production cost. Not exactly, again, sure what a lot of this stuff means here, and the staff and all that stuff. Yeah, okay. Moving on, again, team lead. I just went with highest level people. Now, the big 3 things you can change, or actually, I guess 4 things you can change here, is your automation, your tooling quality, your shifts, and the production ratio of your different trims. So out of the one model, I have 2 trims, and I can do full production with one model, or I can kind of one trim where I can kind of vary that. So I went with more or less a 2/3 bias towards the automatic transmissions. This is just the reality of what you see in the United States, which is the market that we're working with, is that there is, at this point in time, more automatics being sold than manual transmissions. You might even change this ratio even further than that, maybe even making it a quarter or even less than that. But I think 1/3 is a decent number for this model in any case. Now, as far as this goes, now automation is more or less how much automation your factory is using. And the end results you're going to have with this is you're increasing overall cost, tooling cost, but you're decreasing your staff. So as we can see here, by going down 1, I have more staff, but I have less tooling costs. And also the production numbers I'm able to do changes as well. So as I get more automation, I'm able to get more models out. So that 1,000-ish number that we got, I think it changed it a little bit because we messed the ratio up a little bit, but yeah, it's not that big of a deal. So this number is changed a lot by this automation. So if I set this back down to the default, which was 50, we can see that the overall production that I'm getting is going to drop as a result. Not a big amount, but it does change. And now this is 1996, so I figure there's a fair amount of automation in this year period, so I went with 75%. I don't know how accurate that would be, but that's what I went with. Now, another big factor here is shifts. Now, this is going to affect a number of different things. First off, it's going to affect the overall cost of the vehicle. So you can see the cost here. So we have the one trim, how much it costs me for just the car itself, nothing else, and between the 2 trims. So we can see the manual transmission version is a little bit cheaper than the automatic transmission version. Now, by changing the shifts, we're going to be changing that dynamic as well as how much we can produce. So if I bring that down to the default, which I believe was about 2 shifts, we're producing a lot less cars. So if we go to total production, we see that has dropped significantly. But also the cost has gone up as well. So we're using more man labor, which is cheaper than the robot labor if we bring that shift count up. but we're increasing our staff, but also that man labor costs less than the labor of a robot. So we're also bringing down costs. So I made this 3 shifts for our car plant. Now I did that a little bit differently than the engine plant. So if we switch over to the engine plant, we can see large factory and producing about 877 engines. Now with this amount of production, I'm actually producing fewer engines a day than I'm producing car models. More than likely, you would probably want to balance the two, but that's just the dynamic of the way my production is going. Now, I went with the same amount of automation in my factory, but I ended up going with 2 shifts rather than the 3 shifts I had before. Now, because there's only one engine variant, I can more or less either turn production completely off, or actually it doesn't even let me do that. So it's just full on. This is the production with this. I've had more engine variants than I could switch that up, and I'd probably want to balance that with the trims that are using those engines, obviously. Now, another thing that I have kind of ignored is the QA threshold, and I'm not really going to tamper with this too much, but I'm going to imagine this is more or less a quality slider that's going to affect different things. It's going to bring probably costs up, but it's going to affect the overall quality of the engines being produced. I have no idea what these graphs mean at the moment. I guess this is the overall quality of the car that you're going to get, and by changing the threshold here, you could probably cut off some of that lower quality production that you're getting with that bell curve. We're not going to do that. We're just going to keep things down at the base of 50 for now. But even with that base, we are cutting off some of that lower quality build that we might have. All right, with all that being said, all of that stuff set up, we can get the overall cost of the car. So right now we're in the manual trim, and these are the different families that like our car and what we're doing well with, which honestly, I think we're hitting the market exactly where we want to. We want to appeal to family and commuter style markets. So we're doing not too bad in commuter, and we're performing at our best in the family and family sport categories, as well as the pony category. Now, why we're performing well in the pony category is that is kind of more of a muscle car kind of category, but we are, for some reason. We're actually performing better here than we were in the family market, but affordability-wise, we're liked better in the family market. I went with a standard 5% markup that I'm going to use for all of my models and trims from here on out, just to keep things kind of balanced. But we see the overall cost to the consumer of $12,207. That might be a little bit on the pricey side for the year period, but not too far off of what I think you would expect. Let's go ahead and see the difference with the automatic transmission. And switching to that trim is going to bring us all the way back here, but to get back, we're just going to click this, and we can see we have a little bit more cost to the consumer, but we can also see where our preferred element is. So it's still family, which is good. I like that. That's kind of the segment we're going for. We're still doing well in the commuter category, but we have another category that we're doing well is a city economy, which is, again, a nice category for us, exactly what we're looking for. And I think we did a good job of making the car model fit into the market categories that we wanted it to. We're not doing so well in the pony category, and I think a lot of that is a drop off in performance that we saw from the manual transmission versus the automatic transmission. So overall, pretty happy with the build. Let's go ahead and save all this up and exit out. And apparently this is a separate tab that we have to exit out, and take a look at what we have here. So between the two different trims, we're doing better in drivability in the automatic trim versus the manual trim, which I think, that's something we've always seen. Sportiness goes manual versus automatic. So again, we expect that. Comfort goes to automatic. Prestige goes to manual transmission. I would expect that's top speed and various other categories of why we're getting that a little bit of an edge with the manual transmission. Safety is more or less the same because these vehicles weigh more or less the same. There's going to be slight differences in weight, which we see here between the manual and the automatic, but it's not enough to really change that safety dynamic. And then we have practicality, which more or less stays the same. We have off-road, which goes a little bit in favor of manual transmission, which I think makes sense. We have utility, which is much more in favor of automatic. Not really sure why that is. But we could check out that utility tab and the detailed stats to figure out why. And then we have reliability, and the automatic transmission suffers here, and I think that makes perfect sense. Economy goes in favor of the manual transmission, which is both a result of the difference in the transmission as well as the way we set up the gearboxes. So again, I think that makes sense. And we more or less have seen some of the other things. We're getting a little bit worse emissions with the automatic transmission. I think that's why the way we set up that gearbox. This takes a little bit more time to build and a little bit more cost to it, but we're not seeing that cost to consumer that we got with that other stuff. So we would actually have to jump in to that tab to see that. In any case, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I honestly have learned a lot with these new additions from the new update, and this is Mouse Gunner signing out.